Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody this evening to our Academy of Learning. And this is brought to you by the Marie Jose and Henry R. Kravis Center for Cardiovascular Health at Mount Sinai Heart. So tonight we have the pleasure of our speaker being Frank Vera, who is the clinical manager of the Cardiac Rehabilitation and Medical Fitness Program at the Kravis Center. So he's going to do an in-depth discussion on skeletal muscle and its vital role in maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Also, we'll be discussing the importance of the topic of muscle health and exercising, and we can have an open discussion after some of his talk, and we'll be taking any questions. So before we begin with Frank, just a little business here. So any of the attendees will be on mute, but you can put in your questions in the Q&A, and I will be feeding those questions to Frank during the course of the program. At the end of the session, you're going to get a link that will have just 3 or 4 simple questions. And if you could please answer that, will give us some idea about how well we did tonight and any interest in future presentations. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank. Go ahead, Frank.
Janet, thank you so much for that introduction. Yep, tonight's subject is muscle. I think we're going to have a very exciting topic to discuss. There's a lot of things that we will be going over. This isn't going to be too in depth. I don't want to get too much into the physiology. That could take hours to discuss. And in fact, there are lectures that are presented that are very, very long, and just going over some of the characteristics of muscle physiology and metabolism. But tonight, I really want to leave everybody here with a basic knowledge of what muscle is, how important it is to sustain the health of muscle throughout the lifespan, and also talk about maybe some of the characteristics of muscle that we have. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I have a PowerPoint presentation I'd like to show and kind of follow through with everybody. But as Janet mentioned, please submit your questions if there's anything that you are uncertain about, anything that you hear me talk about, you'd like some clarification in. I think it works really well when we have a discussion, because there might be someone else that has the same question as you, and with answering a question like that answers a question for the whole group of people. So I think, Janet, you can see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so again, topic of tonight is let's talk muscle. And just to kind of give some context behind, the discussion tonight, I had a talk not too long ago, I think a couple of months ago, about resistance training. And we spoke about different ways you can train your muscle, some of the training repetitions and rest periods and things like that. But today, like I said, some of the objectives I hope everyone leaves with tonight is to have a better understanding and the general changes in skeletal muscle that occur with age over the years, and why that's important. The functional significance of skeletal muscle health in general, and obtain a basic knowledge on skeletal muscle anatomy and function. We want to understand how muscle adapts to training. I think that's also very important for us to know what's actually happening when we're exercising our muscles and certain muscle groups, both acute as we're exercising and long-term. And also leave tonight with an understanding of various ways to train and maintain our muscle health throughout our lifespan. And before we begin, I'd like to give some context to this. The most recent survey that the CDC has it still shows a very low percentage of the US population that participates in structured exercise on a daily basis and meet that are actually meeting the guidelines. And that number is around 30% of Americans actually meet those guidelines. And an even smaller number of that small population actually train their muscles in resistance training. So this topic of muscle health, to me, is very important. And it plays a large role in maintaining a healthy life and achieving longevity. So before we go on, I'd like to just give a little bit of background on myself, because I think that's also important to know where the speaker's coming from and what makes me credentialed to speak about this. I attended Texas Lutheran University for my bachelor's degree in exercise science. There, I held a study and a research on looking at the recovery on fatiguing muscle and what was the best modality or the treatment to use for delaying minimizing the onset of muscle soreness. So we looked at cryotherapy, which is typically, the icing, putting ice on muscle, versus compression without any ice or anything like that. And we studied the effects of what our participants experienced. And we had some pretty striking outcomes with that. And if anyone's curious and knowing a little bit more about that, please feel free to ask maybe later on today. After my bachelor's degree, I attended California University of Pennsylvania. There I did my master's in rehabilitative sciences and exercise science. I am a corrective exercise specialist through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. So I am credentialed to prescribe exercise for any type of muscle aches, pains, things like that, to help correct posture, to help correct the kinetic chain in our body, and just how we move and how our limbs, activate as a functional unit in our body. I've worked in cardiac rehab for a little over 10 years, starting my career in Austin. And I love what I do. It's a big passion of mine, and I'm really, really into helping people better their lives and help them feel better. I know cardiac events are very traumatic, and I really love enjoying seeing the people come in to our clinics, sometimes debilitated and scared, and then leaving very, very positive and confident to continue their lives exercising. I've also worked in physical medicine as well. So, I have a long history of being in this healthcare environment. I want to go ahead and just start off by talking about what we're actually going to be exploring today. And to kind of put things in on the table here, there are three types of muscle. We're going to be focusing on skeletal muscle today. But I think it's important to also know that the human body has three different types of muscle. Cardiac muscle, which is the heart. The heart itself is a muscle. It operates on its own involuntarily. We can't control that. The heart is controlled by hormones. To some certain extent, we can control and manipulate the heart rate through relaxation techniques, through breathing techniques, but we can't just think about, let me slow my heart rate down or let me speed it up. Just doesn't work like that. We have smooth muscle also located in our bodies. It's also known as visceral muscle. So these are the muscles that are located inside organs to help pass food in our stomach. There's muscle in our blood vessels as well that help constrict and dilate when we need to have changes in blood pressure happen. And again, this is also involuntary contractions. These are things we can't control. And tonight's main topic will be exploring skeletal muscle. So again, why is this important that that we explore this? Well, it's a tissue that supports and moves our bony structures. It's what gets us going. Without muscle, we wouldn't be able to move. So this is something that we can control. It is voluntary, and we'll be exploring a little bit more about how all of this works together. Now, why does this matter? Well, it should be important for all of us to try and achieve a long, healthy life, to exercise daily, to be achieving those recommended daily goals for exercising. And when we exercise on a daily basis, well, we're pretty much treating all of these components to life and fitness that you see here. Exercising daily helps increase our cardiorespiratory endurance. And the cardiorespiratory, your endurance is your heart and your lungs, being able to efficiently exercise for long periods of time without any undue symptoms or any difficulty. We have health-related components that we see through body composition. That's maintaining a healthy BMI, maintaining a central adiposity for us that doesn't lead into any metabolic conditions like diabetes or anything like that. When we exercise, on a daily basis, we have a health-related component of our muscular strength and our power improvement there, muscle endurance and flexibility. So while we're exercising, we have all of these health-related components that are improving, but there are also some skill-related components that really are achieved when we do resistance training, when we're exercising using hand weights or ropes, or when we try and work on a balance and things like that. And these skilled related components are agility. And agility is the ability to be able to move quickly from side to side, change your direction without any issues in your balance. Coordination is the ability for muscle units to work together to provide smooth contractions so that you don't have a lot of shaky movements. And that's also important for muscle efficiency and economics and how our body uses energy when we do activities. Balance is another important part. Balance is something that we should all be exercising and trying to improve. Think about that when we're walking. We're all standing on one foot every single day at some point while we're walking, and that's during our gait, our swing phase. When we're walking, one foot is on the floor, the other one swinging through to take the next step. We're standing on one leg, and your balance, it depends on your ability to keep you upright. When we see balance deficits, well, we start seeing a change in your gait. We start seeing slower or shorter step distances, and that can affect how you're walking, your activities throughout the day, and a lot of other things. Your power, the ability to generate fast and strong contractions through your muscles. Reaction time is also an important thing. You think about how fast you are to react to something coming your way, and how practical is it for you to work on your reaction time? Well, think about when you're walking down the street and maybe a cyclist, or you're on, just something comes your way and you want to get out of the way very quickly. Your reaction time is going to be dependent on you noticing that person coming through and you making a movement to get out of the way. And the last thing is speed. We want to be able to have speed in all of the actions that we do. So I want to go ahead and start talking about the characteristics and some of the functions of skeletal muscle, especially with muscle strength and power. And again, why is this important? Well, because skeletal muscle controls all of these, and it helps us. Muscle strength and power, the muscle endurance and fatigability, balance and mobility, motor performance and control, flexibility and joint range of motion, Flexibility is also another thing that we tend to neglect a lot. Um, I'm guilty of it, and I know a lot of people are, but we all should be stretching every day. And I probably stretch maybe once or twice a week. But the flexibility in muscle is also very important for the health of muscle in general. Um, so some of the typical changes we see with muscle characteristics, and especially in muscle strength and power, is we see a decline, with aging, through the aging process, in concentric, isometric, and eccentric contractions. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, well, what does this mean? Well, muscle contracts, and when it contracts, the fibers shorten. We'll get a little bit more into that in some slides that are coming up, but muscle shortens and it contracts, and it also can hold a static hold, meaning that there's no lengthening or shortening of the muscle fibers. But imagine yourself holding a gallon of milk out in front of you. You're holding that, and that would be, an isometric contraction of the deltoid muscle, your muscle up here, and your bicep muscle, and everything that is holding that object or that weight out in front of you. Eccentric contractions are lengthening of the muscle. And the best way to kind of describe this is when, let's say you're doing a bicep curl, and the concentric phase, with the shortening phase, would be when your bicep shortens, and your bicep is right here. And if you guys can see this, that's good. But for those who can't, try to imagine me doing a bicep curl. This would be the contraction, the concentric phase of the movement. The eccentric phase is when the muscle lengthens and goes back to your starting position. There's still muscle tension here when you're going back, so that we call that eccentric contractions of the muscle. And these changes usually decline around the ages of 40, but accelerate in later stages of life, 65, 70 years old. And lower body strength declines faster than upper body strength. That's what we've seen through science and research. We have a lot of muscle mass that we carry in our legs. The body is a very, very functional machine, and one of the things it gets rid of first is tissue that we don't use, and it requires a lot of energy to sustain muscle in our bodies. So if we're not using the muscle in our legs, that usually tends to go first, and we see that through sedentary time, sitting time, not exercising. And power declines faster than strength. And again, the power is the ability for your muscle to exert force forcefully and fast, and strength is the ability to just kind of carry something very heavy. So we see these changes, and the importance of this, and the why we want to have we want to know this is because the muscle and strength and power is a predictor of disability in our later stages of life. We tend to see, people who have these deficits in muscle strength and power more likely are to have a lot of issues later on in their life, with either having to use a wheelchair or a walker, assisted devices. More likely are to be more sedentary with their activities. Some of the changes we see in muscle endurance and fatigability as we age, obviously the endurance declines. More work is required for force production for the same tasks. So what used to be very easy for us when we were younger becomes a lot more difficult to do. And think about your normal activities of daily living. If cleaning the house, doing laundry, going up and down the steps, all those little movements, although they're not tasking, or they're not hard, really depends on your muscle endurance to perform those with ease. And as we get older, well, we can't do those things for as long as we used to. So exercising your muscles and trying to take care of that is very important for being able to sustain all your activities of daily living without being so tired at the end of the day. We're still not quite sure why this happens. There are a lot of mechanisms that occur in the aging process. The whole aging process is a very complex situation, but we do know that that's one of the things that happens with the changes in muscle as we age. Typical changes we see in balance and mobility. We see a lot of deficits in sensory, motor, and cognitive change and the biomechanics. And this is all related to the nerves in our body. Every muscle is controlled by nerve endings that originate in the spinal cord. And as we age, we see slower transmission in those electronic conduction between the spinal cord and the muscle at the end where it innervates. So we see balance and mobility issues occur as we age through muscle, and the changes can adversely affect the balance and mobility. And this is important because, when we have deficits in balance and mobility, well, it causes a lot of fear in falling. And we all know that falling can be a very detrimental thing as we grow older. The falls can have a lot more of an impact to someone who is 70, 80 years old than someone who is 20 or 30 or 40. So it's important for us to keep that in mind with our balance and mobility. Some changes we see in motor performance and control. Reaction time decreases, like I talked about earlier. Speed of movement decreases. Precision of our motor control is altered. So motor performance and control is very important. To better understand this concept, if you can think about one of the first times you tried to do a new exercise, how shaky did you feel? Or how uncoordinated did you feel while you were doing that exercise? All of that is determined by the motor control that you have in order to provide those fluid, smooth muscles. And that usually changes with training and over time. But as we age, this naturally declines, and we start seeing a lot more effort to create basic, simple movements like walking or like sitting down or like standing up. So, we can expect these changes to occur. And again, the functional, significance of this is that it just requires a lot more energy to do very, very simple tasks and live throughout, our daily lives. Okay. So one other thing we see in muscle changing throughout the years is a decline in flexibility and joint range of motion. We see that there is a significant decline in our hips, in our spine, and our ankle. I know as we kind of picture elderly individuals walking, we see a lot of shuffling of the feet. And that's because older people the older population generally lose the ability to dorsiflex their ankle. And that's, imagine my hand as the foot. That's the ability to lift your toes up into the air. And that ankle dorsiflexion is very important for ground clearance during our swinging phase while we're walking. If we can't dorsiflex, we can't bring the toes up to clear the ground as it comes through. What happens is altered kinematics. We start seeing feet turn out, so that way we can kind of just skim through the floor. We see a lot of shuffling. The hips kind of have an outward rotation, and we see a lot more movement and swinging through hip flexors. So instead of, the ankle going up, the hip flexors, helping, we see a lot of more dominance in hip flexors being the main muscle for providing that forward movement, and that eventually could cause hip issues and back issues and a whole multitude of things. By age 70, 70 years, 20 to 40% decreases in all areas. And it especially occurs more in women. And muscle and tendon elasticity decreases. So the ability for muscles to be able to stretch and contract and relax, the muscles just get very tight, and it makes it very difficult to do very, very simple tasks. And flexibility is very important for completing tasks very easily. So there's a much more demand to move tight muscles than it is to move relaxed muscles. And we all experience this when we wake up in the mornings. We get out of bed, we're tight. It's so hard to move around. You can't even bend down. Your back is hurting, your ankles hurt. All of that requires more energy as opposed to having warm muscles, flexible muscles. So the economy to move more muscles is a lot higher than to move stiff muscles. It's a lot higher than moving relaxed and stretched muscles. So stretching should be something we should all be trying to do every single day. Whether it's 10 minutes, 5 minutes. We know that some is better than none, and it can go a long way for a lot of us.
So Frank, I just want to say, I'm hoping that you're getting to some of the positive parts, because right now I see a lot of doom and the aging process, and as I'm one of them in the over 40, let me say, just say it that way, population. So we will get to some of the positive aspects and interventions that we can take in order to help mitigate all these issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think it's very important that we all know what will happen if we don't train, if we don't exercise. There are consequences to not meeting those daily requirements of exercise. And I think if we don't know these things, then we really don't know where we're going, what we're doing to our bodies. So absolutely, we'll talk a little bit about how we can train the muscles in just a second. But I also want to go ahead and talk about the anatomy of the muscles. So we all have a good picture and idea of what we're actually looking at, or when we're trying to imagine the muscle. So as you see here, for those of you who can't see, or you're tuning in on your cell phone, what I have here on the screen is a picture of a muscle that's cut in half, that's attached to a bone. And what we're looking at here is the muscle belly is what we call kind of this red area. I don't know, Janet, can you see my mouse on your?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we have right here is what we call the belly of the muscle. And this is where all the shortening and lengthening occurs within the muscle. This muscle fiber right here is where we see the actual fibers closing, shortening and lengthening. Now, if you want to imagine a line of people playing tug of war, holding on to a rope and pulling something, that's kind of how our tissue inside our muscle works. Everyone's holding on to a rope and pulling an object on the other end. Inside our muscle fibers, not to get too in depth on this, is kind of what's happening in here. All muscle tissue here connects to a tendon. And I want to make it clear that muscle only connects to tendons. A lot of the times we get confused, what is a ligament? What is a tendon? Well, ligaments can connect bone to bone, and tendons connect muscles to bone. So without this tendon right here, the muscle wouldn't be able to pull the joint it's trying to move. So once the belly part of the muscle contracts and all these fibers come together and they shorten, it creates a pull and tug on this tendon, and it then eventually moves the bone. And that's how pretty much, muscle contracts, and that's how it moves in our body. Muscles never act in isolation. They all have muscles that assist function. They all kind of work together as a group and as a unit. So there are, sometimes some exercises where people say, well, I only want to work this part out. there you can focus on a muscle, but there are other muscles that are actually, also working with that too. So, I think it's important to also understand that concept that muscles never act in isolation; they act as units. And I think it's also good to show a picture of what our muscles look like. And inside there's blood vessels and other things to help feed the muscle with all the energy substrates that muscles require to function.
So Frank, I do have a question now. So how does too much fat impact the skeletal muscle?
Well, too much fat makes the muscle have to work more. There's added weight to the muscle. It could also change the kinetics, the kinematics of the muscle, and changing the range of motion. It can also change your kind of your posture. So it can alter the kinematics of your movements. Aside from making it much more difficult to move your body around with added weight, it's difficult for someone to, well, not want to say difficult, but it's a little more energy costly to activate and exercise with added fat and tissue on the muscles. And for just to kind of tidbit for another topic maybe, but muscle on the heart, fat tissue on the heart is really bad. You think about the muscle that the heart has to contract. You have put fat on top of the muscle. It makes it very difficult for the muscle to have to contract against all of that added weight and all that tissue that's around it. So I hope that answers that question.
All right, so we have two other questions, but I think you're going to get into something about food and diet, and then exercises that can improve the muscle strength and balance and flexibility, right?
Sure, absolutely. That's all coming.
We'll get into those.
All right, and so in this slide, I'd like to discuss a little bit more about how the muscles actually work. What is causing this contraction in the muscle? And what we have here is the really nice picture of the muscle and the nerves that innervate each muscle. Now, I have there's a section here, if you can see my mouse, at the very end of these motor units, we have something called the neuromuscular junction, and this is where nerves send the impulse to contract a muscle. All the nerves that contract our muscles come from our spinal cord. The spinal cord branches out into spinal nerves. So you think about your spine, and then a spinal nerve comes out, and inside those spinal nerves you have all of these terminals, these spinal nerves that eventually come out into axon terminals. And the synaptic cleft right here is where we have this space between the end of the nerve and the muscle, where we release a certain neurotransmitter that stimulates the muscle. And as we age, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a section here on the nerve called the myelin sheath that naturally deteriorates. And without that myelin sheath, the electronic conduction slows down. So we see a lot of slowing in muscle activation, reaction time, force contractions. And this is what we believe could be leading to a lot of the deficits we see with the aging process. And exercise has been shown to help keep the myelin sheath healthy and maintain a fast reaction between receiving the message from the brain down to the spinal cord, down to the nerves, to the axon terminals, and ultimately to the muscle. So with training, we can preserve this myelin sheath here. So now we get to the topic of training muscle. there's various ways we can train our muscle. And I think it's important to also know that muscle can be trained in three different ways. We can train the muscle to have endurance. We can train the muscle to have muscular strength, and we can train the muscle to have power. Now, I purposely put them in this order because this is the recommended way to begin an exercise routine. For anybody who's a beginner, a novice, exerciser, and wants to begin an exercising training routine for resistance training, it's always recommended to exercise the muscle for endurance first. And the theory behind that is that you cannot gain strength if you don't have endurance. And the same thing for power. You cannot train power if you don't have the strength. So for instance, you wouldn't want to go to the gym and start lifting the most heaviest things that you can right away. You're more likely to get injured, first of all. And it's not the proper way to start training the muscle. And there are certain things you want to consider when you're training the muscle first for these specific characteristics. And one of those is obviously the repetitions. And we recommend 10 to 12 repetitions for beginners and intermediates, because also we don't want to increase that after the day after the delayed onset muscle soreness, have you in this immense amount of pain. So we always like to start out slow, start out low, and the rest periods between your repetitions is also important. We want to only rest about 45 to 60 seconds, so that we train the muscle to be able to sustain repetitive movements in a short amount of time. We don't really want to give the muscle too much of a rest period between your sets and your repetitions. And that's how we appropriately train for endurance. After we've gained the muscular endurance, then we can start training for muscle strength. And muscle strength we've seen to really occur with anywhere between 12 to 15 repetitions. This is where the weight gets a little bit heavier. This is where we start seeing the weight being closer to your one max effort. And that's the heaviest weight you can lift with just one repetition. You want to be able to feel that fatigue on your muscle in the last 3 to 2 repetitions. You don't want to start feeling the burning sensation, the inability to continue your exercise at repetition 8 or 9. You're not really gaining the benefit of exercising the muscle for strength. It's too much weight. Try and go down to a smaller weight that you can achieve the 12 to 15 repetitions. This is where we want to give ourselves a little bit longer of a rest period because of the strenuous activity that the muscle is going through, the forceful contractions that we're doing, lifting heavier weight. We see that we use a little bit more of the substrates that help muscles contract. And with this rest period, we've seen that anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes, we're able to restore the energy substrates that help muscle contract. So again, you don't want to do a set of 15 repetitions, very, very, heavy at the end, wait for 30 seconds and try and get back into doing another set of 15. Odds are you're not going to complete your second set. You're going to be very tired, and there's no benefit to that. You want to train smart. After we've trained the muscle for strength, then we can start training the muscle for power. And this is where we start seeing close to maximal one rep max weights being used. For instance, if your one repetition max on a chest press is maybe 100 pounds, then you're looking at using 80% of that weight for 3 to 6 repetitions. So then you would be using 80 pounds for that chest press, 3 to 6 repetitions. And this is where you want to purposely use fast and explosive movements. all the other components in training your muscle for endurance and strength, everything is done in a nice controlled rhythmic pattern. Power is when we really want to start trying to use explosiveness through your movements. And because of the intensity that our muscles are working at, we want to give them a longer rest period, about 2 to 3 minutes, to allow, again, for the muscles to recover, to be able to give another high quality set right after you finish doing your 3 to 6 repetitions. It could be very taxing. That could be very tiring, which is why we want to work on endurance first, more than anything, before we work on strength and before we work on power. The endurance exercises are really light weights. We're wanting to be able to complete 25 repetitions, 15 repetitions, and using lighter weight is how we're going to achieve that many repetitions. Janet, any questions that
Yes. So they just to clarify the difference again between endurance, strength, and power. And you did somewhat do this, but to go through examples of each. So, you know, maybe going, if you started with a weight of such and such with endurance, and then you would move to strength and power, just a little bit. They wanted some examples of each of these types of exercises.
Yeah, sure. So you're looking at, for example, let's say if you're starting a weight training routine, for the first 2 to 3 weeks, you want to give yourself time to develop your muscular endurance. That's usually around how long it takes for you to start developing the muscle endurance. And you're going to be using very light weight. For example, like I used the chest press example before, you want to use a weight that's light enough to be able to achieve 25 repetitions. You don't want to do something that you're going to be very tired at, at repetition 10 or 9. You want to have a weight that you'll be able to get all 25 quality reps out of that, and have a small rest period. So you don't want to completely exhaust yourself with each repetition, with each set. Endurance training, it can be tiring. So you want to give yourself, a break. If there's something you don't like, don't do it, find something else. But for instance, a very simple, exercise to train the shoulders, would be a very basic shoulder, front raise. And for those of you who can't see, if you're tuning in on your phone, again, I'm just raising my arms from my sides up to my shoulder height. And you would use a weight light enough to get 25 repetitions. You would rest for 45 to 60 seconds and do it again, and do 2 to 3 reps. After about 2 weeks of training with the light weight, then you would increase your weight a little bit higher to where you would be able to only do 15 repetitions. And it's the same thing. And the power, I don't really recommend working on power for that exercise for a shoulder. You're only moving one joint. The rotator cuff muscles are very small. You don't really want to be doing power movements with your shoulders in this motion. If you want to work on your shoulders, a chest press for power is usually something I would recommend doing, because it incorporates larger muscle groups. It's not isolating the shoulder. So yeah, you want to be careful with that. And I hope that answered the question.
Okay, yes, definitely. I think so. And then someone's put in that they are a long distance runner, 65 years old, and been noticing loss of muscle mass in the legs. Mm-hmm. How can I help to prevent or slow down this process?
Oh, absolutely. This happens a lot. We see a lot of switching of muscle fiber types that are more efficient with long endurance running, as opposed to the other muscle fiber types where we really see hypertrophy and increasing in muscle size. And it's a very common thing that happens to a lot of runners. And you can kind of see this, their legs get very thin. But, to give you some context behind the different muscle fiber types, our body has in theory, 3 different types of muscle fibers. The type 1 muscle fibers, which are better at endurance exercises. They don't tend to grow as big as much as we try to exercise them. They usually tend to be a little bit smaller in size, but they're way more efficient in moving the body for longer durations. And we have the type 2 muscle fibers, and there are 2 categories of the type 2 muscle fibers. And for sake of keeping this simple, we'll call them A and B. Those are the muscle fiber types that we see that really respond to strength training by growing larger. And when someone is consistently training endurance exercises, there's a neglect in those type 2 muscle fibers. So what you want to do is break up your routine, not always run, but perhaps do some kind of anaerobic exercise where you're using your legs, like a jump squat or a lunge, or even just a basic squat, to train the muscle fiber types that respond to strength and increasing in size. And it'll also help with your running efficiency and your mechanics. So you'll start seeing that, you know, your stride will be a little bit better. You might feel a little bit faster, sometimes even doing wind sprints, maybe 10, 20 yards. Just doing some sprints back and forth can help stimulate those type 2 muscle fibers. So yeah, breaking it up.
So we have some other questions, but let's have you get through some more of your presentation, and then we'll get to the questions.
Sure. So the training adaptations, what happens when we start exercising? A lot of people say, I start feeling really strong. Am I getting my muscle? Am I getting stronger? What usually happens first when we see people who are consistently exercising are all of these adaptations are primarily happening from neural adaptations, from the conduction and from the spinal cord to the nerve that is controlling the muscles together. We start seeing more coordination when we're very early on in our training regimen. We have a lot of uncoordinated muscle action, very shaky movements, very not balanced and all that. The more repetitive stimulus we put on the muscle, the better the nerves communicate with our muscle and allow the muscles to act together as a functional unit. So we start seeing smoother contractions. You start feeling like there's less effort to move your limbs against that resistance. For example, if you're using the same weight for 2 weeks, you feel stronger. Well, it feels a lot easier to move the weight now than it did on day 1 than it does on day 14. Well, that's because you've created neural adaptations. Nerves are talking to the muscles a lot more efficiently. And it also helps with muscular endurance. And this is why we try to train those muscle endurance first, because we know that a lot of the adaptations that occur are going to be from neural adaptations. And that's why we tend to try and have the endurance exercises occur first. So with these neural adaptations, you'll have a lot more efficiency with doing the same action when you first started exercising. We don't really start seeing muscle hypertrophy, which is the muscle size actually growing, until about 6 weeks of starting from the initial training. And again, this is consistent. This is exercising 3 to 4 days a week. You don't really see hypertrophy with spotted exercise training 1 or 2 days a week, with large gaps in between. For example, maybe exercising strength training on Monday and then trying to strength train on Saturday. We don't see enough on the stimulus and the muscle cells for them to grow in size. But with consistent exercise and creating that stimulus in the muscle to grow, we see about 6 weeks of initial training that to occur. And it's important that we progressively overload the muscle so that we can continue to see that muscle to receive the stress to increase in size. So for instance, you don't want to be using the same weight for 6 weeks. After 2 or 3 weeks, once you felt like you've gone a little bit stronger and the exercise is a little bit easier, this is when you want to start adding the weight. And a good increment in size up is about 5 pounds. So increase that weight up to 5 pounds. You want to kind of feel what you felt on day one when you first started exercising, the fatigue, the tiredness, the difficulty. Otherwise, without having this progressive loading throughout your training routine, you're not going to experience that hypertrophy as much, or you're not going to really experience the optimal strength gains. And just to kind of share some sex differences with muscle too, hypertrophy occurs more in men than it does in women, and that's just from some genetic predisposed things that women don't necessarily have that men do, and this usually is all due to hormones in the body that help stimulate the muscle cells to grow in size. And now talking about training methods, resistance training for endurance and strength. And how do we train our muscles for this? We can use body weight exercises. You can use hand weights, exercise machines, exercise bands. These are all really good different ways to train the muscle for endurance and strength. And if you don't have, hand weights or any type of machine at home, there's always some creative ways to find something at home that you can use, as a resistance, like a gallon of milk, or a grocery bag filled with cans of beans or whatever, and you can the grocery bag has handles. You can use that as a handle, as a weight. There's some ways you can get creative at home with finding weights. There is some science behind, there's a lot of science behind unilateral training and bilateral training. Just to kind of give a background on that, unilateral training would be exercising only one side of your body at a time. The most traditional thing we see in gyms is, chest press, both arms going at the same time, shoulder press, both hands going up. We tend to use both sides of the body at the same time. But unilateral training would be working on only one arm, one side of the body at a time, whether it's the arm or the leg. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that unilateral training can be very beneficial in strength training and coordinating and balance training, that can help improve more than bilateral training. So you might want to mix it up from time to time and try and maybe do an exercise that you typically do with both arms with just one arm or one leg. Multi-joint versus single joint movements. Multi-joint movements are any type of movement that requires more than one joint moving. For instance, an example of this would be a squat. So going from the seated position to a standing position, your hips, your knees, your ankles, they're all moving at the same time. A single joint movement would be the example I gave earlier, like the bicep curl, where the elbow is the only thing that is moving. You want to focus on exercising multi-joint movements first, if you're looking to gain strength and power, because multi-joint movements require more muscles to work together. There's a lot more force production. They're more complex movements, so you gain a little bit more from doing those exercises, as opposed to a very basic isolating knee joint bend or kick or something like that. Exercises for improving skill-related components like agility, coordination, speed, and reaction time and balance. Just placing yourself on anything that's an unsteady surface and trying to hold your balance on one foot or even on 2 feet will improve your skill-related muscle components. So that could help improve your balance. Balance discs are also very good tools that we use in our gym to help with patients that are trying to improve their balance. If you don't have a balance disc, and what it is, it's just a flat kind of thick balloon. When you step on it, it gives you an unsteady surface. If you don't have that at home, a cushion or a pillow is something you can stand on that'll give you that unsteady surface. And trying to do maybe some exercises standing on a pillow or a cushion can also help in improve your core stability with during your exercises. Coordination and agility would be exercises that have you moving side to side in various planes, various, like twisting or shuffling left and right, things like that. Those are all different exercises that can help improve your skills. And some training tips for everybody that's important to always keep in mind. Every rep counts. You want to have a purpose behind every single rep. You don't want to just go through your reps as quickly as possible. Usually, if you're able to do this really fast and feel fine at the end, you're not really doing much to stimulate the muscle. So we want to do slow and in control movements. The slower you go, the more neural stimulus you're creating to try and move that weight or the resistance in a smooth plane. Hold that isometric hold for 3 seconds. So when we talk about holding it for 3 seconds, I'm really talking about, for instance, when we're doing a chest press and you're pushing forward, the isometric hold would be at the very end when your arms are straight. Holding that for 3 seconds, it activates the muscle. Your muscle is still activated. And going back down on the eccentric hold when the muscle is when your muscle is lengthening, stimulates more stress on the muscle. So we can actually see better improvements to someone who is going slower, holding and going back longer than someone who's just going, super fast. Your breathing is also very important. You want to exhale through the main contraction of the push or the pull. You don't want to hold your breath. That can cause a lightheadedness or a passing out situation. So again, when you're doing the main movement of the exercise, whether it's the pull up or the push, you want to breathe out, and then you want to inhale when you're returning back to your starting phase. And also keep in mind, it's okay to make mistakes. Make your adjustments, do what works for you, and most importantly, enjoy it and have fun. That's what it's all about.
We have a lot of questions here, Frank, if we can maybe go through some.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to combine these two. Is one day training and another day, or do each less training in that day? And another one kind of related, how many days a week are needed for muscle training to be effective?
I'm sorry, Jen. So you cut off at the beginning of that. I didn't hear the questions.
Is it better to train one day and then rest, or do each day, train each day, but do a lesser amount each day? And then how many?
Yeah, so you're cutting out, but I think what you're asking is what should be the regimen on the weekly basis, and what should be the rest period. So you want a rule of thumb is you can exercise a body part every other day. So for instance, if you wanted to exercise your upper body, you exercise on Monday. Tuesday would be a lower body exercise. Wednesday could be a rest day. And Thursday could be your upper body exercise again, and Friday could be your rest. Friday could be your lower body day. You never want to exercise the same muscle groups in back-to-back days, because your muscles just went through a lot of shear forces that recover days to recover. So it's not smart to exercise in consecutive days the same muscle.
Okay, and how does stretching of TheraBands with different colors correspond to weights, and what effective use of these bands are for training muscles?
Yeah, so the bands are great because they provide a progressive loading on the muscle. The more you stretch the band, the heavier the resistance becomes. With traditional, weight training, the weights always stay the same, and in fact, because of the leverage and the force of gravity, at some point when you're doing hand weights, the muscle, the weights the weight of the resistance tends to be neglected by just the mechanics of your elbow and your arm. So in this position, you're just relying on your bony structure and your mechanics when you have hand weights. But if you're doing bands, you have that band still pulling because of that progressive resistance. So I would always recommend doing bands. They're a great way to transition into weights, and vice versa. It's a good way to create a variety in your resistance training. They would help for all aspects of endurance, strength, and power.
Okay, another question is for a good full body workout, do we have to, can we do this at home, or do we have to go to a gym? And if we have sore knees or hips, what's the best way to train the lower body?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you could always find a way to train the whole body at home, even by mimicking the act of swimming. If you were hold on to some hand weights, maybe 2 or 3 pounds, and just try and pretend you're swimming or doing this, that's a whole body up, that's a whole upper body movement right there. You look at your trunk, it's turning, the arms are going, you're pulling the weight back, and you can even do this standing up. That's one example of a full body workout.
So okay, can you hear me okay, Frank?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out, but I can hear you.
Okay, so maybe you want to end in if I'm cutting out, because right now I do have some questions that we didn't get to, but maybe in the link, people can put down their questions and we can answer them individually. The other thing is there were some requests for the slides. If you want that, we can provide that. And
Yep.
you want to tell them about how we're going to be setting it up on YouTube?
Yeah, so we will be hopefully at the end of the month with September, we'll be putting all of our videos on YouTube. They will be on the Mount Sinai YouTube channel. And within the Mount Sinai YouTube channel, they have different libraries. We will have our own library, so it'll be easy for you to access all of these webinars that we've been presenting.
Okay, so I think that's it for tonight. And we want to thank all the participants, but particularly our speaker, Frank, for giving us and I learned so much tonight, giving us very informative information about our muscles and how we can continue to exercise them and improve them and stay healthy as we continue to age. All right, thanks a lot, Frank. And everyone.
Thanks, everyone.